This is a screencast for the class from Monday, December 5th, lesson 3 in CSE 350. I am actually doing the screencast after class rather than posting the conversation we had during class in an effort to make it a little more efficient than the 30-45 minutes of conversations that we had today. So what we looked at today was this concept of creating what's called a variable or a box, if you want, to which you can apply your name and in which you can create a value. So what we did today is we talked about the fact that in order to create a variable, you need to think about a meaningful name that you could give to this box that will hold a value. The guidelines or conventions that we spoke about was to have these names use only lowercase letters and underscores. So for example, you could have a very simple variable name like the word greeting, which is probably a variable in which we would want to put a value that corresponds to a string greeting for someone. If you intend to use a much longer name, maybe a name that actually uses multiple words, the convention is to use what's called snake case, which is to actually, like this, snake case, where the convention is to separate the words you're using with an underscore. So in this case, we could have something like my greeting. And that would be the name of the box, the name of the variable. So what can we do with that? So the very first thing that we can do is that we can assign a value to that variable. The way we do that is by using the equal sign and then the actual value, which in this case will be the string hello. So let's look at that syntax. On the left-hand side of the equal sign is the name of the variable. On the right-hand side is the value to assign to that variable. Notice here that the equal sign has a very different meaning from an equal sign in math, which implies equality. Here it's an assignment operator that says take the right-hand side and put that inside of the box that has the name from the left-hand side. So if I hit enter, you can see now that Ruby evaluates this expression by returning the value of the variable, in this case the string hello. What can I do with a variable? Well, a variable can now be addressed by name, and anytime I use the name of the variable, I will be given back the value that it holds. So if I type my greeting, it now says hello. How can I assign a new value to this variable? Simply by repeating the assignment operator and typing a new value on the right hand side. You can see in this case that my greeting now takes on the value of hello again. In terms of conventions, we talked about today but the fact that there are some variables that will, in Ruby, that will start with a dollar sign, like this, or an @ like that. And while these are valid, and I just want to mention them because you may encounter them as you learn Ruby, the scope of using these is really not within this course. So you should stay away really from using dollar signs and @ but just use lowercase and underscores. So what kind of values can you put in a variable? Well, you can put any of the data types we've seen so far. You can have x equals 7, and you can have x equals 15.0, so first an int and then a float. And you notice I've reused actually the same variable to give it a value of a different type, and Ruby's perfectly happy with that. If I do a puts of x, it will say 15.0. It will evaluate and print on the screen the value of x. What happens if I try to use a variable that has not been defined? Say, for example, the variable name y. Well, if I type the word y, Ruby will complain and say it's an undefined local variable. In other words, you have not actually given a value to the box name y. So in this case, I'll say 32, after which I could then do a puts y, and it would work just correctly. Other things that we looked at today is what can you start doing with these variables? How can you manipulate them? And actually what we spent a bit of time on is the idea of how would you add 1 to the value of x. So let's look at x right now. Let me change x to a value of 5. Okay? How could I make x be value 6, meaning x plus 1, for any value of x? The way you would do that is to simply reuse the assignment operator and evaluate on the right hand side an expression that equals to 6, or in this case x plus 1. So the syntax for that would be like this. Notice how different this is from what you would do in math, where this kind of equation would really not have a solution, for example. Here in computer science, the way you read this is, okay, x is a value of 5. Let me look at the right hand side first and say that x plus 1 is 6. Take this value of 6 and put that into the box named x. So this expression is meaningful in Ruby and actually ends up with the variable x having a value of 6. If you try to do something like x equal x plus hello, we saw today that this would not work, and the reason is because x is an integer. You can't add a string in an integer. But what you could do is if x was actually hello, could you do x equals x plus Mr. Hugon, and what you would then get is on the right hand side you would get hello plus Mr. Hugon. So hello Mr. Hugon, be a string, and that string would become the value of the variable x. Finally, the last part of today's conversation was about how you actually get a value from the user and store it into a variable. And what can you do with that? And what we talked about is this idea of standardin.gets.chomp. We talked about how there are 3 parts to this expression. Standardin actually opens a communication channel between you and the keyboard of the user. The dot operator applies an action to this communication channel. In this case, it's a gets, which is the inverse of a puts, meaning I'm not trying to put something on screen, I'm taking something from the screen or the keyboard if you want. And finally, the last dot is to a method called chomp, and chomp looks at a string and removes the last character. And in this case, this last character has to deal with the new line, the carriage return that we use when we enter a string. So in this case, if I do standard.gets.chomp, you will notice that nothing happens because I have yet to type something on the screen. If I type the word hello without quotes, because automatically the standardin.gets will assume that it's a string, it will, when I hit the carriage return, the value that gets returned is just the word hello without a carriage return because the chomp removed that last character. The standardin.gets.chomp is not that useful unless you assign this result to a variable, and we would do this in exactly the same way that we assigned strings and ints to a variable before. So I could say something like name equals standardin.gets.chomp. Now the program waits for my input. I can type my name, Mr. Hugon, and the variable name now has my name, which means that if I want to greet whoever is the person who uses this program, I could either do hello plus, and actually I would probably want to put a space after the hello, plus instead of typing Mr. Hugon, it's whatever is the name of the person. Hello, Mr. Hugon. Or I could use string interpolation, which is a technique we started seeing in the last class, where I would say put hello, pound, curly bracket, name, and Ruby will interpret this as evaluating the variable name inside of the string, which is Mr. Hugon, and then printing that along with the word hello. So you get exactly the same result. This concludes lesson 3.